Welcome to the Gastrowave podcast. I'm your host Robin.
And I'm Caoimhe.
On our first episode, we're going to be talking about Scotland's premier beverage, Buckfast, a drink with a fairly interesting relationship with Scottish identity and the media.
We're going to take a deep dive into where Buckfast came from, the terroir, and what it means in today's modern society.
What are we talking about today?
Your favourite thing.
It's Buckfast.
It's Buckfast.
Not just Buckfast, but specifically a piece of art that was produced by Glasgow School of Art graduate and textile designer Claudia.
Ultimate cool girl.
She's very cool. Claudia Veneroni. Just to paint a word picture for the audience, what is this painting that we're looking at right now?
That's subjective.
That's very true. It will be. We'll add it along in the show notes.
I think for the purpose of this, it's the perfect embodiment of the different definitions of Buckfast.
And why do you say that?
The representations. So you've got kind of high class. So if you can't, obviously people that are listening can't see this, but it's a really beautiful artwork, really like bright, vibrant, quite modern. I would say kind of like 80s, 70s disco aesthetic as well. Like the colours, you've got like gay pride references and like club kid culture, and you've got this Buckfast bottle that's as a vase with flowers in it, and then you've got the Glasgow classic smash bottle on the ground. So you've got these two representations of Buckfast, and I think that's our inspiration for recording this today.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
For me particularly, Buckfast is very close to my heart, and I think it's indelibly linked with the Scottish identity. And as Caoimhe was saying, this piece of artwork really has inspired this podcast, and that's what led us on to this conversation. Now, I believe you've had a little look into Buckfast and have a few things to raise.
Yeah, not as visceral as yours. My experiences with Buckfast are very varied to you. I've only tried it once.
You've only tried it once?
And that was when we were in Mull.
The only time you tried Buckfast was with me.
With you. What are you doing to me, Robin? And I lived with a guy years ago, and he would drink it for breakfast at 11 in the morning. So I have this very mixed feelings towards it. And I think that that's quite representative in society, is this idea that Buckfast is, as they say, endemically. That's a word.
Okay.
Well, there's no red squiggle under my lines, so spell check is telling me that that's the right word. But it's completely linked, let's just go with that, to the problems. And I say problems in inverted commas because, again, problems to one is not a problem to another, with alcoholism, especially in Scotland.
I mean, it does have its links there, but we have talked about and around Buckfast for about 3 or 4 minutes now without actually describing what Buckfast is. And I'm sure many of our listeners will have only tangentially heard about this through the news and through the media without ever having actually tasted this incredible beverage. So to describe this to you, it is a reinforced, caffeinated and sweet wine product. Do you have the actual description for it there?
It is made from, I think, Marsala grapes in Spain. So from sweet dessert wine grapes, originally. A wine is made out of them, like a really sweet wine. And then to that are all your wonderful caffeine, sugar, spices, and all things nice.
Do the monks who make this in Devon actually announce what spices they add?
No, but I was saying earlier, I heard a rumour that there's monk's toenails in there too.
I mean,
so who knows what goes into that mix? Especially, how many hundreds of years old is Buckfast?
Many hundreds. It became incorporated in 1927, but it's been being made long before that. And I don't know if we can say monk's toenails on air without a potential defamation charge.
Oh, okay. This is just hearsay?
That's hearsay. Okay, that's fine. And most of this overview actually comes from an excellent scientific paper by a guy called David Leishman.
It's fantastic.
It's a really good paper called Blame It on the Bucky. I will include a link in the show notes. But it essentially gives a full overview of Buckfast and its appropriation. Now, one of the signifiers of this appropriation was the 1994 episode of Rab C. Nesbitt.
I'm not familiar.
You're not familiar with Rab C. Nesbitt?
I've heard you mention him before.
Okay, so
enlighten me, please, Robin.
I shall. Rab C. Nesbitt is probably a Scottish icon at this point. Now, he embraces and embodies a type of Scottish working underclass. And in one of the episodes, he discovers Buckfast. And many commentators have put the rise of popularity of Buckfast in Scotland down to this one single episode, because the explosion of Buckfast in the early 90s was around the same time as this episode was released. So there's a lot of links there. David Leishman doesn't necessarily specifically go into Rab C. Nesbitt, but he does go into the rise of it and where the predominant drinking took place in the Buckfast triangle of North Lanarkshire, Motherwell and Cumbernauld. So that's the sort of basic overview of it, and I would recommend anyone reads the paper if you want to know a bit more about it.
Yeah, and then the title is actually quite catching as well, From Acceptability to Transgression. And I think that's a perfect embodiment of these two kind of dynamic viewpoints of Buckfast in society, is acceptability and transgression and the association of both. Because it was created as a medicine. And people drink it as a medicine.
To some extent.
To some extent, yes. And it leads to transgression.
Yeah.
Which he goes into in detail.
The transgressive behaviour is perhaps the problem I have. Now, this is where Robin's going to get into some visceral upset about what Buckfast has done to it. I have a lot of problems with how the media represents Buckfast.
Absolutely.
And how Scotland deals with Buckfast.
Yeah.
Because to me it certainly comes across that this is a purely transgressive behaviour, and it in no way reflects Scottish society as a whole, and it's not actually a real part of Scottish identity. Funnily enough, it becomes a sort of no true Scotsman fallacy. People like to believe that Buckfast drinkers aren't really Scottish, and that's not really part of Scotland.
Is that because Buckfast isn't Scottish?
Because the actual product doesn't come from Scotland.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that personally. I would say Buckfast has become something Scottish, even though it's not made in Scotland, just like Stornoway Black Pudding is Scottish, even though the blood does not come from Scotland. National identity is a kind of strange thing. But perhaps my main problem is the denial of this transgressive behaviour. People like to put it down to people who are an underclass, people who are criminals, people who are Neds, rather than embracing it as a larger part of the Scottish identity. And it leads on to a number of problems with Scottish exceptionalism and people tending to pretend that Scotland has some qualities and characteristics that it doesn't, rather than accepting the things that are negative about Scottish identity and moving forward based from that.
I read an interesting article. I did a quick Google search, Scotland Buckfast, just to see what, came up. And almost every news article was associated with transgression. And it was quite interesting. I like this line in one of these articles, which again we can link. I think it was a Guardian article.
Yeah.
They said Buckfast has become a byword of Scotland's social ills.
Ooh.
And I thought, Robin's going to have something to say about that.
A byword of Scottish ills.
Byword of Scottish ills. And I just thought, well, that is such a shame that you Google, anyone looks up Scotland Buckfast, and there's this immediate association with depravity, I guess. And like you were saying, this sign, signifier, and going back to Claudia Veneroni's image of this smashed bottle on the ground, but then it's a thing of beauty with flowers and this representation. It's kind of understandable that people will have these mixed feelings about it, that I would have these mixed feelings, that you would too.
Yeah.
I think the media does have a lot of responsibility for how it is portrayed, and I think her approach to show it in the two lights, and it's more impactful.
Certainly is. And it's good that we've got onto the media responsibility side of things, because I really do think the media has a lot of responsibility here, because what they've effectively done is create a scapegoat, create a symbol of depravity, rather than actually deal with the underlying causes of depravity. It's much easier to just chalk up, oh yes, it's Buckfast that's causing all of this knife crime and all of this negative behaviour, rather than actually dealing with the issues.
So there was a report by the BBC in 2010, and they did some research, and I think it was around the time when Buckfast tried to introduce cans of Buckfast, 250ml cans.
Can you still get those? I don't know.
No, you can't, because in 2014 they released, in order to tackle bottle crime, of which 114 times Buckfast bottles were used as physical weapons.
Wow.
In crimes. So I think to tackle this, and this, you know, this identity of smashed bottles being Buckfast in Scotland, they brought in these cans, 250ml cans. In a month, they sold out of 16,000 cans. And they ceased to produce them after that. 16,000 in a month.
That's incredible.
250ml carrier cans of Buckfast. I mean, they must have known that something bad was going to happen from there.
I think I got a few.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Because they were really nicely branded.
Yeah, I was going to say, they were. And they made t-shirts.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did.
You can still get t-shirts and you can get pens with Buckfast Abbey on it. And I suppose this is... I've had arguments with people in the past who claim that Buckfast is not genuinely drunk. It's only drunk ironically now. So it's only... It's sort of moved past this being drunk by the underclass, and it's moved into sort of the plaything of rich, ironic hipsters.
So this fetishization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the perfect example, and I'm not going to name names, but there is a certain cocktail bar in Edinburgh, which is where we're recording, where we both live, and they have Buckfast ice cream.
Now,
and it's in a vending machine, which is super trendy and quirky and all of the above.
I mean, that does kind of seem like you're just playing hipster bingo at this point.
Pretty much.
And you're trying to hit as many nice hipster things.
They do also have Iron Brew, but...
The Iron Brew ice cream's been around a while.
Yeah.
So, are these people who are enjoying products like Buckfast ice cream or Buckfast cocktails, are they enjoying this authentically, or is this display? Is it trying to hark back to an underclass that was there? Yeah. What's actually happening?
That's a heavy word.
Which
you
one?
want to bring up authenticity with a gastronomer.
I did. We should probably build an alarm into the show whenever I say something like that.
Should we have a bell
The
that goes off?
The
authenticity. At least we're not on to terroir.
Oh my god.
How have we managed to talk about Buckfast and not talk about terroir?
I really dug for this. I really tried to find any article, anything that had Buckfast and terroir.
I knew you would.
And I couldn't find it.
No.
I've really tried, but I couldn't manage it.
Maybe you should write one.
What I think is interesting about this ironic consumption is, what does that sort of say? What does this signify? So, do people consume it? Is it just as a joke? Is it something as surface level as that? Or are people trying to connect to something about Scotland that they've felt they can't connect to because of the media's just straight out denial and ostracisation of Buckfast as a thing, as a cultural signifier? As a
30 days in a bottle
30
kind of drink.
Well, some of the other names, 30 days in a bottle, just as a symbol of
Wreck
crime.
the Hoose Juice, Commotion Motion. I quite like those ones.
These are all titles of names for Buckfast, which David Leishman found in his research.
Yeah.
Mrs. Brune. There's quite Wreck the Hoose Juice is probably my favourite.
Is my favourite too.
Wait,
you can hear Kevin Bridges saying that in one of his stand-up shows.
Absolutely,
yeah.
But
I don't know. I think Buckfast. We're talking about signs and signifiers and how people receive the messages that are portrayed through the media of Buckfast, and it has become this thing of mythology almost. It's this, like you're saying, people drink it ironically, but is it ironic? I think there is some kind of need for attachment, something to hold on to that people feel like is part of their identity.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it is part of people's identity. And to say that because this is a new phenomenon, because perhaps it only started in the 1990s, that was 38 years ago.
No, it wasn't. I'm not that old.
That's 28 years ago. Whoops. That was 28 years ago.
28 years
But that's a substantial amount of time.
It is, yeah.
And to deny the fact that that's been culturally influential for that amount of time is to deny part of people's cultural identity.
Certainly. And also pop culture changes so fast.
It does.
So 28 years is old news. That's why we've got the reinvention of the wheel.
Yeah.
Buckfast ice cream.
And Buckfast cocktails.
Buckfast cocktails.
But I suppose the real sticking point is that people within the media seem to just want Buckfast to disappear. That seems to be the narrative.
Yeah, I would agree.
Rather than embracing it for what it is. And it's either ironic or genuine consumption. And it's impossible to just associate a set of behaviours with one product, one food. That would be utterly insane. If you were to expand this to anything else and say, right, okay, the rise of bank robberies in London is associated to the increased consumption of Pink Panther wafer biscuits. That's utterly insane.
I didn't know where you were going with that, but I quite like where you ended up. Pink Panther wafer biscuits.
But that would be ludicrous.
Yeah.
So obviously there are some links between Buckfast and transgressive behaviour, but to put all of the weight on one product is nuts.
It's a scapegoat.
It's a complete scapegoat.
It's a media scapegoat. And you see it time and time again with many, many things. Like the deep fried Mars bar and obesity.
It's
which
another
we
one.
probably won't get into in this episode. That's a whole other episode.
It certainly is. And there are a lot of similarities between the Buckfast conversation and the deep fried Mars bar conversation.
Well, when you're talking about Scottish identity, absolutely. There was was it like an April Fool's Day, or there was a tweet that was sent out from Buckfast that said they were going to cut the sugar and the alcohol content of Buckfast.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And so this is when I was doing all my digging through the media and through like Guardian articles and etc. And I stumbled upon this screenshot of this tweet from Buckfast, but apparently their account had been hacked. So they say. So they later said that they were going to reduce the sugar and the alcohol, and there was absolute uproar.
Everyone went mental.
It was like the Diet Iron Brew, or when they rebranded the Iron Brew recently. And they since took it back. They retracted their statement. They never changed the recipe of Buckfast. They said they never had any intention of reducing the sugar or the alcohol. It's like, whew.
My word.
Don't mess with the sugar.
There would have been riots.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Just to move on to something a little bit fun.
Okay.
Before we dive wholesale back into intense conversations about what Buckfast means to identity. Did you see the promotional picture of what could be described as a conventionally attractive lady?
Buckfast babe?
Buckfast. I didn't want to say it. But,
she's a babe. She's a good time girl.
How would you describe this image to our listeners?
Oh, I don't know if I.
Okay, well,
say this without it coming across like I'm passing judgment.
Oh, I thought you were saying you couldn't talk about it unless we were on Gastro Wave nights.
No, she's not like deep throating the bottle or anything. Close to it, but no.
I think that's given the listener enough information. I'll include a picture.
She has a very fetching manicure, French manicure.
It's a very good manicure.
It is a very good manicure.
Okay, so what we are talking about is what looks like a promotional image for Buckfast that's been done with a glamour model and has been touched up to look very sort of glamour model-esque. Now, this picture can be found wherever you Google Buckfast, and this image will come out. It's all over the internet.
It's very overtly sexualized. Like, oiled up, glossy, yeah. It's
pretty sexualized. But what's interesting is I thought there must be some reason behind this. There must be a story behind this. It's not just simply done because it's not been used by Buckfast in any promotional way, so it's clearly not been paid for. So after hours of reverse image searching, I actually managed to find both the photographer and the model, and I contacted them both for a statement.
Your level of research knows no bounds. Reverse
image search.
Let's not dwell on that.
We can go into that at some other point. And there was some other jiggery pokery that I had to do. Yeah, like cutting out a little section of the picture so that I could find the text, and then it doesn't matter.
I do have the time in your life for these things. Give me your secret.
Powered by Buckfast.
Buckfast.
It's just the caffeine keeps me going. So I reached out to both the photographer, John Robertson, and the model, Heather McCartney. Now, John Robertson does a combination of glamour shoots, tattoo model shoots, and interestingly, wedding photography.
I did see that.
It's some interesting stuff on the man's Instagram. Now, when I reached out to him, he confirmed that it was not an official shot, and it was done for, quote, a bit of a laugh, unquote. He seemed very flippant of it, but then when I pushed a bit harder, he did open up that there has been a lot of other models who want to do more Buckfast shots with him. This has been a common ask, and he's actually in talks with Buckfast to do a series of glamour shots. Whether that'll go anywhere or not, we don't know, neither does John. And when I spoke to the model, Heather McCartney, who is now an Australian-based glamour model, but is from Scotland, she took part in this shot when she went back to Scotland to do a separate glamour shot, had a ruthless hangover, and picked up a bottle of Buckfast on the way to act as a hair of the dog. And
I can't imagine anything worse.
Can you imagine that?
No, I really can't.
And during the course of consuming this bottle of Buckfast, both her and the photographer thought it'd be a really funny thing to do a glamour shot with Buckfast.
Nude, we don't know exactly.
I think it was fully nude.
Fully nude.
But so that's the story behind the Buckfast babe, which I think is just delightful. Because there's the whole subculture attached to Buckfast.
Yeah, absolutely.
That people really buy into.
It's this new wave of Buckfast. It's this mainstreaming of Buckfast.
Is it mainstreaming? I would say it's still counterculture. But it's a different form of counterculture. So rather than it being sort of a drink of the underclass, it's becoming a drink of choice. Because it shows something. You become part of something. If you look at hashtag Bucketeer, you can see all of these people who proudly drink Buckfast. Or that...
But is that not mainstreaming? I mean, it's certainly glamorizing it.
You know what? I don't think
increasing awareness. And it's reaching out to a whole different demographic than Buckfast really ever would.
It's true, but it couldn't ever be fully mainstreaming, because if it ever became fully mainstreaming, it would lose the aspect that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
And so people would no longer identify with it. For example, that video that you showed me.
Was it a Vice documentary?
It was Vice.
Munchies. This series, Munchies.
And the journalist has a drinking session with some self-professed bucketeers.
They were interesting characters.
They were very interesting characters.
It was a throwback to the 90s.
And if you were to look at them, you would not describe these people as your traditional Ned on the street drinking Buckfast.
Which we know now is...
I may have mentioned this to you before in conversations off air, but I think what's interesting is that Buckfast seems to have followed an identical trajectory to absinthe. So absinthe was first produced as a medicine. Then when it was the production methods got ramped up, it became a drink of the aristocracy. Mm-hmm. And then as production ramped up further, it became a drink of the masses because it was a very quick way to get drunk, inducing a moral panic, which the media responded to, decrying this drink as associated with transgressive and immoral behaviour. And then artists in Bohemia started to drink with it. And that's what we can see within Claudia Veneroni and the hipsterization of it. Yeah. And then beyond that, it became a class leveling drink where everyone drank it and there was no association beside it. And it's interesting to see that Buckfast seems to be following a similar trajectory, and we seem to be just before the point where it becomes acceptable for everyone to drink.
To which point you'll stop drinking it.
Yeah, I'll find something else. I need to stay transgressive, Caoimhe.
It's true, honestly, because Puccine in Ireland is doing the same thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's potato-based moonshine that you would just brew in your cupboard, your hot press as we call them in Ireland, there's craft distilleries that are now creating poachine and bottling it and selling it on supermarket shelves.
There you go.
There you go.
So perhaps this is kind of a common thread that drinks can follow. Perhaps products can follow.
But do you think it's the media that are orchestrating this through its representations? Because if Buckfast, for example, is represented in a way, like we've read, through association of Ned culture, there will always be a subculture that goes against that.
I suppose, yes, the media does play a very important role in this. And to be honest, that's something that, again, to mention David Leishman, he mentions.
Yeah.
In his conclusion, he says it's pretty much down to Buckfast to change the view of their product. And the fact that they've not advertised, I can't remember, he said they've not advertised since the 70s? Don't quote me on that, but they've not advertised for a very, very long time. And he more or less puts the blame on Buckfast for not advertising and not restating their position, that the media has been able to do this and build this image and this identity for them.
There's a photographer that we were looking at based in Glasgow, and he wrote an article about what Glasgow and Buckfast means to him. Well, Glasgow as a city, and of course Buckfast came up. I think the article's called An Urbanist's Guide to Glasgow, and he mentioned that he writes that as I crisscross the city photographing the architecture and more, it seems for many it is the electric soup of Buckfast tonic wine. And while many cities peddle this urban myth of proximity to a rat, here the green glass bottle of the tonic wine never seems far away.
Oh.
And I just think that's so powerful.
That's a good quote.
And from this, he began this photography side project, so that every time he saw one of these bottles, just as Claudia Veneroni has portrayed in her drawing of this smashed bottle on the ground, because it is synonymous with Glasgow culture, he says, hundreds of photos later, this obscure gallery of glass features shattered and intact examples from across all areas of the city. Personally, to the photographer, the one indispensable item is a camera, and for all in Glasgow, a wee bit of attitude and humour goes a long way. So then that comes back to your argument of, are people drinking Buckfast because they want to subvert this idea of being Ned culture associated? Or are they trying to find some attachment to the city that they love or the country that they feel they identify with? We don't have the answers to these questions.
I mean, I could always respond to that with, why not both?
Yeah.
It can always be a little bit of both. I think what's wonderful, and bring us back full circle because I like that kind of narrative, is looking on Claudia Veneroni's website. She describes her art as illustrative realism with graphic exaggeration. And I think that's a wonderful way to sum up what Buckfast has become.
Yeah.
It's illustrative and real to, yes, the damage and the transgressive behaviour, but the way it's been portrayed in the media is a graphic exaggeration. It's placing it upon this pedestal that it becomes a moral and social arbiter of how people behave, rather than just being treated as a symbol and a product, which is what it is. And it's been handed far more power than it's actually deserving of.
I think also what we're forgetting is it tastes pretty damn good.
It's good. It's nice.
And, excuse my French, it gets you fucked fast.
Buckfast does get you fucked fast.
Right? So for someone who's of minimum means, who wants a good time, who needs a bit of energy, I'm not going to judge.
We've all been there. So, how do you feel about Buckfast after that long-winded discussion?
I still feel as conflicted and confused about drinking it as I did at the start of this journey.
This journey,
but
this Iliad.
I would drink it.
I mean, I don't think I've ever not been confused and conflicted about drinking Buckfast, and yet I've done it since my early teens.
But what I will take away from it is to no longer place absolute trust in how it's represented to me.
Absolutely.
Which is very important.
I think that with anything, with any kind of gastronomic perspective, it's to not consume passively.
Yeah.
And to be aware. Now, whether that's the consumption of the Buckfast itself, or whether it's the consumption of the representation it has in the media.
Yeah.
As long as you're engaging with this actively, and you're not just doing this simply because it's a cheap and quick way to get buzzed and drunk, or it's a quick way to gain some kind of strange, obscure social capital through drinking it ironically, and you're aware of what it is, then drinking Buckfast's okay, in my book. That's a gastronomer's pass. You get to drink Buckfast, guys.
That's a thumbs up. And if it wasn't 11:15 a.m, we'd probably toast the end of this podcast with some Buckfast, but I don't think either of us are prepared to do that right now.
Yeah, that's for later.
That's for later.
Well, thanks, guys. This has been the Gastro 8 podcast. I've been Robin.
And I'm Caoimhe.
We'll see you next time for some kind of discussion about something else.
Yeah, I can't wait.